What if the ugliest jumper in the gym outscored the prettiest and embarrassed the Scouts handbook in the process? Kevin Martin's form looked broken, but the scoreboard kept saying otherwise, until one quiet rule change yanked the rug. This is the story of a crooked release that became a money printer, a career built on angles instead of aesthetics, and the moment the game shifted beneath his feet. Stick with me, because the twist that unraveled it didn't happen on a highlight or a headline. It happened in the fine print that nobody reads until it hurts. Shock alert! The kid with the crooked release was built for the big stage. In Zanesville, Ohio, Kevin Martin soaked up Bulls games, copied MJ moves at dusty courts, and grew into a lanky 6'7" scorer with tunnel vision for one goal: the league. Western Carolina took the bet, a tiny town for a huge dream, and Martin paid it off with relentless buckets, strides in transition, and a first step that turned corners into layups. He lived in the gym, repeating that funky release until it felt automatic, even if it looked off. By junior year, the goal was non-negotiable: first round or nothing. He told his staff the plan was simple: a guaranteed slot or I come back. It wasn't bravado, it was leverage built on production and obsession. The stage was set, but a question trailed him everywhere. Could a shot that looked wrong rewrite what right even meant? Hold that thought, because the jump from small campus lights to draft night would drag the form under a spotlight. Here's a twist. A first-round promise landed despite that odd release. Sacramento called it 26 in 2004, locking in a skinny guard whose jumper looked like a backyard experiment. Rick Adelman's Kings still clung to the glow of their early 2000s peak, so the rookie mostly watched, learned, and waited. Scouts muttered that mechanics beat swagger, and his looked unsalvageable. Martin didn't blink. Doubt became runway. Practices turned into a lab for Princeton reads, shoulder fakes, lane angles, and stolen footwork. The form stayed funky, but the timing sharpened and the motor never cooled. Would NBA length erase his edges and bury him on the depth chart? The answer would arrive the usual pro sports way: fast and messy. Backup scorer Bobby Jackson hurt his wrist. The rotation buckled and the door finally cracked open. Pretty or ugly, the tape would tell the truth. Opportunity knocks loudest when no one hears it. With Jackson out, Martin finally logged real minutes and flashed a different card: burst. Instead of leaning on that offbeat jumper, he sliced to the rim, stole points in transition, and stacked a 17-point night that whispered promise. But the box score had thorns. Across the stint, he shot just 33% from the field, and a rough 20% from deep. The farther NBA line exposing his mechanics. Adelman kept him learning more than playing, and when the bracket dropped, the verdict stung. The rookie was left off the playoff roster as Seattle ended Sacramento's run 4-1, so the clock restarted. Would promise become proof, or would the odd release become a ceiling no workout could crack? He averaged 15.1 minutes in that window, a tease, not a roll, and every attempt felt like an audition under a microscope. The next yes would demand cleaner reads, stronger finishes, and patience that burned. Plot turn. A starter went down and the understudy seized the stage. Bonzi Wells tore a groin, and Martin stepped in with a 19-point jolt on 55% shooting. This time mixing that looping pull-up with sharp cuts and quick drives. The box score finally smiled, but trust comes slow. Before that gain, he sat at 37% from the field and a rough 16% from three, fuel for every doubter. Adelman weighed the risk and realized the roster left no safety net. Martin was the next man, whether critics liked the motion of his elbow or not. The title said starter, the reality said audition. So he leaned into pace, hunted early offense, and sold fakes that bent defenders. The question remained: could he turn necessity into inevitability before the depth chart snapped back? The answer would begin at the stripe, where he would turn contact into points. That edge was coming fast, and once it showed up, it would change how coaches guarded him and how scorekeepers filled box. Watch closely. The trick wasn't pretty, it was profitable. Martin would pick up his dribble, freeze a defender with a shot fake, then leap into the airborne body and walk to the line. In mid-January 2006 against Orlando, he finished with 22, and 11 of those came at the stripe on 12 tries. The jumper still looked sideways, but the math was straight. Over the next 10, he averaged 12.1 on 50% from the field and 34% from deep. Proof that touch and timing survive odd mechanics. Then came Phoenix. Sharing the floor with Bibby and Peja meant fewer touches, yet he drilled 4 of 5 threes and led the Kings in scoring anyway. Efficiency was the message. He wasn't dominating the ball. He was exploiting moments, and coaches noticed that fast. Defenders faced a bad menu. White and send them to the stripe. Stay down and give up the lane. Crowd and he cut behind. The crooked release wasn't the point. Leverage was, and it was earning closing minutes and trust. Just when momentum hit, the floor shifted again. Bonzi returned. Martin's minutes dipped, and the offense tilted back to the vets. Yet in the first game of that reset, he needed only 9 shots to drop 25 and win. A clinic in economy that screamed starter production on role-player touches. Then the franchise turned the page, trading Peja for Ron Artest, while Bonzi's groin flared up again. Martin retook the slot and never looked back. Down the stretch, he averaged 15.4 points on 52% shooting and a blistering 42% from 3. Numbers that forced Adelman's hand. He wasn't cute, he was effective. The reward? A playoff role against the top-seeded Spurs, a stage where gimmicks die and real weapons cut. San Antonio's system punishes hesitation, so Martin leaned harder into his timing game, slipping the pockets and trusting that odd release to beat late contests. He'd earned it. Now came the graduate exam against schemes and traps. Chaos hit instantly. Ron Artest got suspended after Game 1, and the Kings needed scoring without their emotional fuse. Martin stepped forward in Game 2 with a clean 26, but the champs still squeezed him out. Back home in Game 3, he turned timing into a dagger, slipping free late and saving the series with a winner that detonated the building. Game 4 brought another surge, and suddenly it was 2-2. The dream flickered. Then the Spurs adjusted, as they always do, and methodically closed Games 5 and 6. Season over. The lesson wasn't subtle. His odd form didn't melt in heat. It held. He scored without hijacking possessions, reached the stripe on reckless closeouts, and kept turnovers light. San Antonio's length didn't erase his angles. It forced him to find them faster. For a second-year guard, that was big. He left, the kind of reset can feature. In Sacramento, a reset was coming and his role would only grow. Opportunity multiplied. Bonzi turned down a 5-year deal and left, and Martin's name inked in as starting 2. Early in 2006 to 2007, he went from option to engine, dropping 28 in the second game and walking into clutch moments with no flinch. Under new coach Eric Musselman, the green light was real. Across the next 20, he averaged 20.8 a night, fueled by 430 bombs and an absurd 44% from 3, with that side pocket release. This wasn't a hot week, it was a blueprint. He hunted seams, attacked early clocks, and lived in the bonus when arms drifted forward. If the form was a problem, the scoreboard refused to notice. The next benchmark was coming, and it would arrive with a cursed ball and a bigger number. Defenses rotated, tried length, traps. Martin answered with pace and purpose, keeping the dribble and the release quick. He didn't need many touches to matter. He just needed a sliver. And when a sliver arrived in December, he kicked the door in. Hey, here comes the wild one. 40 on December 21st while using the league's infamous composite ball. David Stern had swapped leather for a synthetic that slicked up with sweat and sliced fingers, and players hated it. Martin shrugged, hit 56% from the field, lived at the line, and posted a career high anyway. The problem was macro, not micro. The Kings kept losing close. So his 20.3 per game on 47% overall and 38% from 3 couldn't drag them into April. It did, however, drag ownership's pen across paper. Sacramento locked him for 5 years at $55 million, counting on efficient volume to age well. The ball was scrapped by New Year's, but rhythm lagged. The franchise was sliding from a golden era toward rebuild FOD, and they needed a bankable bucket night. Martin's answer was free throws, corner cuts, and a release that beat late contests anyway. The contract said keep going, and fate tested it fast. Setback incoming. A groin tear yanked him off the floor in early December, the same injury that once opened his own door. 18 games later, he returned and immediately resumed a pattern, dropping 39 on Dallas, 48 on Minnesota, and 36 on Denver. He led the league in free throws made per game at 8.2 across his 44 appearances, punished drifting arms, and kept the pressure on every help defender. The numbers screamed all-star tier efficiency. The standings shrugged, Sacramento's slide continued, and those mega nights landed like fireworks over a losing record. It was the cruelest zone for a scorer. Undeniable production, minimal reward. The calculus stayed familiar. Beat the first defender with pace, bait the second with craft, and let the line add margins. He didn't need sets, just half a mistake. But franchises can't win on solo solutions. As the losses stacked, so did questions about direction, fit, and whether to build around a non-traditional shooter. Stability vanished. Musselman out, Reggie Theus in, then Kenny Nat 4 months later. Martin kept lighting fuses anyway, torching Indiana for 45 and Golden State for a career-high 50. But a battered body limited him to 51 games as the Kings stumbled to 17 wins. New coach Paul Westphal arrived with fresh schemes, and Martin opened 2009 to 2010 by dropping 45 on Memphis for the team's first win. Then the wrist cracked, and 2 months disappeared. When he returned, another pivot loomed. Sacramento moved him to Houston, shipping elite efficiency to a roster that needed scoring and a guard who could live at the stripe. The Kings had been circling, swapping voices while asking the same question of the same scorer. In Houston, the role would be clearer and the lineup steadier. The next tape would test portability and payoff. If the free throw machine traveled, everything else would snap into place. And if it didn't, the critics would finally get the verdict they wanted. New city, same math. Whistle, footwork, buckets. 6 days after his debut, he faced the Spurs, went 14 for 14 at the stripe, and finished with 33 in a rivalry win. Later against his old team, he hung 39, again powered by 16 free throws and relentless rim pressure. The following season, he stacked 20 30-plus nights with a 40-piece on Cleveland and 45 on Portland. A reminder that you don't need a pretty release when you can weaponize pace and contact. The frustration lingered. Houston kept missing the bracket by inches. The production was prime time, the outcomes were not. Teams loaded the first action, he scored on the second. A quick catch, slanted gather, body brush, 2 free points. He slipped behind bigger wings and scored before help arrived. Hate the look, lose to the outcome. But the league was about to rewrite the rules of that outcome, and no one would feel it more than him. Then the floor moved under his feet. After the 2011 lockout, the league reclassified fouls where the offensive player created contact as no calls or non-shooting. That was Martin's pressure point, and the whistle went quiet. His free throw attempts nearly halved, his best lever blunted, and the margin that turned good nights into great ones faded. In March, a shoulder injury shut him down after 40 games, adding insult to the rules reset. The film still showed craft and touch, but the math no longer cracked matchups the same way. The pump fake that drew 2 freebies now drew silence or a side out. Closeouts grew bolder, lanes crowded without the threat of automatic points. Still, the release cashed when open, and the timing off the ball stayed elite. The question was fit. Could he slot next to stars, take fewer dribbles, and convert cleaner chances at scale? The phone rang with a blockbuster answer. Shock trade. Oklahoma City sent James Harden out and brought Martin in. He joined Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook as the bench flamethrower, a cleaner, faster role built for his economy. Game 3 of the run, he logged 29 minutes, took 11 shots, and poured in 28 on 72%. A clinic in minimal dribbles, maximal return. OKC steadied, finished as the West top seed, and Martin's numbers screamed sixth-man value. Off the court, he stayed a ghost. Punch the clock, score, leave. He didn't replicate Harden's creation. He replaced it with ruthless selection and spacing that lifted stars. Defenses couldn't load up on Durant and Westbrook without giving Martin rhythm looks, and he punished late hands. For a title hut, a low-maintenance 18 to 20 off the bench is gold. The formula felt sturdy until the bracket introduced chaos. Round 1 lit fast. OKC jumped to 3-0 on Houston, then wobbled. In Game 6, with pressure peaking, Martin came off the bench and ripped 26 on 60% from deep, sealing the series. It should have launched a long run. Instead, Westbrook's knee injury from earlier in the Rockets series reshaped everything. Against Memphis's defense, the windows narrowed and touches got heavier. Martin's efficiency dipped to 41% from the field as the Grizzlies elbowed OKC out in 5. The roll worked, but the path vanished. He had mastered scoring without pounding the ball, a clean companion for two supernovas. But a scorer's instincts tug at status, stay sixth or take the full runway again. OKC valued the fit, but the market offered reunion and spotlight. His former coach had a seat waiting, and a front-court star who needed a finisher. The decision traded a title chase for ownership of outcomes, a revealing choice. He chose control, free agency to Minnesota and a reunion with Rick Adelman. Next to Kevin Love, Martin settled into primary finisher, spacing the floor and slicing inside when bigs overplayed. The numbers stayed clean, the outcomes did not. Injuries undercut rhythm, and the Wolves kept missing May. When the front office pivoted, shipping Love to Cleveland for the #1 pick Andrew Wiggins, the offense tilted almost entirely onto Martin whenever he was active. He handled it like always, with economy and timing, but the mileage was stacking. The margin for error on a thin roster is brutal. He didn't demand 20 dribbles to get loose. He needed a sliver and a defender leaning wrong. That helps teammates, and it can hide pain. By then, he played through dings that would sideline others, propping up a team short on creation. The balance was unsustainable, and New York would make that clear. Pain test. At Madison Square Garden, he got fouled on a made three, came down wrong, and fractured his wrist. Most players exit. Martin kept going and finished with 37, then missed 2 months while the Wolves spiraled to 16 wins. A midseason buyout in 2016 sent him to San Antonio for one last chase with Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker. The perfect incubator for role clarity. The body disagreed. The wrist and wear dragged his lift and touch. Shots rimmed out. And he closed at 35% from the field with 6.2 a night. The playoffs offered little relief and less opportunity as the Spurs bowed in round 2. The arc that began with a crooked jumper finally curved to a close. It wasn't surrender, it was reality. The league gets faster, whistles change, and a tiny slip turns windows into mirrors. He spent a decade beating margins and cashing a shot most coaches would rework. And with it, an efficient career faded. So, what we make of it, broken shot or broken expectations? Martin turned a non-standard release into a scoring engine, stacked 20-a-night seasons, and even threw down a 50-piece. All while rarely dominating the ball. He was early to the foul game that later defined an era, then got clipped when the rules flipped and the whistle cooled. His legacy sits in the math. Elite true shooting, low turnover, high stripe rate, an offense that scaled next to stars without friction. Was he Harden without the handle, or a volume guy on thin rosters? The tape leans efficient assassin, not empty calories. Coaches chase repeatable edges. Martin built them from timing and incentives, not form perfection, and those travel until the rulebook changes. If that contact window never closed, his counting stats sit louder. Even now, the blueprint is clear and uncomfortable for purists. Here's the takeaway with Bite. Results beat aesthetics until context changes the cost of a move. Kevin Martin proved that form is a tool, not a law, and that leverage lives in timing, angles, and incentives. When the incentive vanished, so did his edge. The next time a shot looks wrong, ask a better question. Does it win possessions, bend coverage, and travel when defenses know it's coming? If yes, don't fix it, feed it. And if the rules shift tomorrow, can you rebuild the edge before the league notices? That's the game behind the game.